Welcome to On Par with the President. David Dismukes is an energy sector expert. He is Executive Director, Director of Policy Analysis, and Professor at LSU Center for Energy Studies. He is also a professor in the Department of Environmental Sciences in the LSU College of Coast and Environment. For more than 30 years, he has worked in consulting, the academy, and government service, analyzing the economic, statistical, and public policy issues in energy and its regulated industries. Let's tee off. Professor, you've been part of the LSU community for more than 2 decades, actually 3. How did your journey bring you to Baton Rouge in LSU?
It's interesting. I went through the typical kind of university faculty recruitment, job application process when I finished school. And I distinctly remember, going through a number of different interviews at different universities and wanting to stay somewhere on the Gulf Coast. And running into the job application for LSU and for the Center for Energy Studies. And I distinctly remember reading it was a long description, and it had all these different requirements as well as attractive qualities. You need to be able to do research, but you have to be able to interact with people. You need to be able to, raise money, but you need to still be able to publish, all these different things. And I'm reading it out to my wife, and she goes, "That sounds like a perfect job. Why don't you apply for it?" And it was in the region. We wanted to stay on the Gulf Coast region because of family and other things. So I applied for the job, and I thought, well, we never heard anything back until later in the spring. And then I get a phone call, and you probably remember the day, this was before cell phones, when you had the voice recorder that you had to push. And there's a message waiting for me when I get home. And they were ready to have an interview. We came out here and had a great interview, loved the campus, loved the whole idea of the center and its unique relationship here at LSU. And they made me that offer, and I came here.
Right. So as an economist, you could study any area, any part of the markets that exist. What got you interested in energy?
Well, I've always been, even throughout my graduate career, in energy. I wrote my master's thesis on nuclear power. My PhD dissertation was on clean air markets and power generation. So when I was in school, I was doing that. But you and I probably grew up in the same generation. We were probably the first generation to have to think about energy. Going back to the 70s, you think about the energy crisis, the gasoline lines. Back in those days, you probably remember that, sitting in the hot car that may not have had air conditioning.
It's tough.
Yes. The rationing, the green stamps, all those things back in the old days, and those rolling into the late 70s, the early 80s with the Iranian crisis. And it was just, a backdrop probably for our generation, and probably the first generation that had to worry and think about energy as a resource and what it meant, not only just from an economic perspective, but these environmental concerns that started, in 1969 and throughout the 70s, et cetera. So it was always a backdrop. And when I got into economics, one of my core areas that I studied in was economic development. And obviously energy is important for economic development, it's important for economic growth. But really what kind of turned me over, it wasn't like when I was 6 years old, I said, I want to be an energy economist or something like that. Like most people, I got a job. That was what really kind of pushed me over the edge to really focus and concentrate in that area. And my major professor had this opportunity. He was working on a consulting basis, advising state governments on the prudence of nuclear power plant investments at that time. And he asked me, he said, look, I need somebody like you to come help me out with this. Can you come work with me and, go to school, work with me and do this? And I said, sure, why not? And I just kept doing that. I kept expanding into other areas in terms of power generation resources, energy efficiency, renewables, et cetera. And I kind of continued that with my master's thesis, my PhD, and that's where I decided to kind of lay my stake.
So if you had to describe what's changed from those days when you were laboring with your major professor to today, what do you think is different?
Everything. I mean, that's the great thing about the business is it's always changing. I mean, it's probably changed since we've been at this table this morning. There are just so many things that influence the sector itself, whether it be geopolitical, economics, technology, the short run, long run, public policy, obviously a big thing, regulation. And all those have changed dramatically. We've seen, I think if you think big picture about what's changed the most in energy, technology has got to be one of the biggest things. We have resources today that nobody ever dreamed we would have had a decade ago. You think about the unconventional revolution in oil and gas. You think about where we are with renewables, with solar, and with wind. I hope in the next 10 years we'll be talking about how storage technologies and batteries have changed. It's just a constantly changing, evolving field.
Louisiana is one of the top 5 states in both natural gas production and proved reserves. Can you explain the importance of that for the state? And what about for the rest of the country? We often talk about the relevance for Louisiana, but what does it mean for the totality of the U.S.?
We are a very large producer, and we continue to have significant reserves, not only here in Louisiana, but in the offshore Gulf of Mexico. Those are important from an economic perspective here because not only do we get the economic activity of the extraction and all the support work that goes along with extraction and production, but those are feedstocks into a very big and important critical component of our manufacturing economy here, which takes those hydrocarbons and turns them into things, right? The resins that are in the carpets here, the shampoo that we use in the mornings. I mean, just about everything that you touch in a given day is touched by modern chemistry and those hydrocarbons. And that's why it's important not just for us, but for the rest of the country. And we did a study this last year for Entergy, looking at the importance of restoring critical energy infrastructure and what that means, not just for Louisiana, but for the rest of the country, and how turning on just a small place that produces nitrogen down in South Louisiana, how important that is to assure that all the refineries in South Louisiana are open and they have fuel and they have diesel and gasoline during a period this last summer where we had already high gas prices even going into that tropical season. So it is important, not just for us, but for the rest of the country, as well as even global impacts. I mean, what we do in natural gas here in South Louisiana is very important today, particularly when you think about the crisis in Eastern Europe right now. And natural gas prices are high for a reason, and that is, Western Europe and Eastern Europe are not using natural gas supplies from Russia, and they're pulling a lot of those from South Louisiana.
Wow. So we're part of the big global
We are, and it's
exchange.
a big part.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, one of the experiences I had here last summer was my first hurricane. Talk to us a little bit about the relationship between hurricanes and energy.
So they're pretty complicated relationships, and they've changed over time. If I had to really point to one thing that makes where Louisiana is different in its energy economy today as opposed to when I started here, is this whole interrelationship with the global economy, whether it's through commodity chemicals, which are nothing more than reformed hydrocarbons, to crude oil exports, which they weren't even allowed when I started working here in the 90s, in the early 90s, to the export of natural gas. Those have all changed. And so when hurricanes come through, they disrupt that. They impact that critical energy infrastructure. They impact supply. They impact prices, and they ripple not just through the United States, but through global prices. And not only that, as I know you appreciate, they impact the communities where all this infrastructure is located. I certainly hope this becomes a light year for us. We could use the break after having 2 years of pretty tough storms. But if we see something like that this year, in the midst of all the other challenges that we've got going on, it could be very, very detrimental for us locally, but really for U.S. energy supplies and for U.S. prices.
Sobering,
it is. I've spent the last 10 years giving happy talks because energy's been a good subject and everything's been rosy, and then just all of a sudden in the last 12 months, things have just, because of geopolitical concerns, the world changing, et cetera, we're in a position where I think we're transitioning into things that are difficult again. And it was like that from 2005 to about the last recession, 2005 all the way 2008, 2009, where all we could expect were high prices, disruptions, starting with Katrina. That really put the U.S. energy economy on its heels, if you think about kind of a boxer, and just keep getting hit in the corner. And things didn't really correct themselves until we kind of had that reboot with the recession. And then coincidentally, we had the unconventional revolution at that time.
So talk to us about gas prices. That's the topic of the day related to energy right now. Folks want to know, when is it going to get back to whatever the normal is, I guess $3 a gallon. When are we going to see the slope go downward?
I don't know. It does seem that we're in a unique transition period right now. The irony and the frustrating thing about all of this is, unlike energy crises we've had in the past and big price run-ups, which have all been precipitated by resource constraints. We don't have enough oil and gas here. We've got to import it from other places, et cetera. This isn't one of those kind of problems. We still have plenty of oil and gas in the United States. The Haynesville is still one of the largest producing natural gas reserves in the country. The Permian Basin is still an enormously large producer of crude oil, as well as the offshore Gulf of Mexico. And we've got reserves that are all over the place. We still have record levels of reserves of both oil and gas. So it's frustrating to be surrounded by all that, I guess, wealth of energy resources, and yet not be able to communicate that into production and getting those prices down. And the energy business is no different than any other business in the sense that it is tied up with a lot of these same supply chain frustrations that many other industries are having. So as long as those persist in our economy, I think you're going to still continue to see those in oil and gas and in gas prices as well. So the disappointing news in all this is you're likely this summer to not see gas prices go down. We're still getting some more creepage on crude oil prices, which continues to put pressure on gasoline prices. And I suspect it'll be a pretty expensive summer. It's going to be a real expensive summer for households, regardless of what energy commodity they're buying, whether it's gasoline or electricity or even their residential retail natural gas. Natural gas is over $9 per 1,000 cubic feet. And we haven't seen prices like that since before the last recession. And that should be as problematic as the gasoline because those feed right into our utility bills. And those could get worse. I mean, we're heading into tropical season for the summer. That could create production disruptions in the Gulf of Mexico and in other places that just could wreak havoc on prices. And that's the wild card. It really could send everything, even higher. Unfortunately, the only thing that's probably going to get prices to go down is if we go into a recession and we start to destroy demand. And because we're not, the supply constraints that we have right now aren't producing more, so we're going to have to back off. If markets are going to recalibrate, the demand side of this equation is going to be the one that has to correct that. And we're already seeing slowing signs, although the economy still seems pretty healthy in a lot of places. Consumers are still pretty resilient. Household saving levels are pretty high. Spending is pretty high. I'd start watching consumer confidence numbers, and when those start to deteriorate, those will probably start correcting those. It's not a real super happy story in all of this because those are the kinds of corrections you don't like to see. You'd rather see kind of supply increasing. But just given what's going on here domestically, some of the challenges we have post-COVID, in an industry that was really challenged before we went into COVID. I think a lot of people forget about that. And then the geopolitical things that get thrown on top of this that make it a lot more difficult to navigate. If that weren't going on, then maybe this is a solution that could work out with OPEC, et cetera. But even that becomes a challenge now. So I don't have a lot of high expectations on that as we move through not only the summer, but as we move through the balance of the year. I'd like to be wrong.
I wish you were. Well, at our university, right now, as part of our strategic initiatives, energy is part of the Scholarship First agenda. What do you see as the future of this industry? And in particular, think about it through the lens of what's the important research that might be happening or going on in the energy sector that you think will be impactful?
I think that the two big things are integration and storage, really, or from a research perspective, because that's where we are having our challenges, and we're probably going to see a lot this summer. I think the summer is going to be a challenging time as we get thin on resources. A number of power pools in the South and in the Southwest and in the West are anticipating some big challenges, and I think you're going to hear a number of discussions about challenges of integrating renewables with that, and that being part of the problem as opposed to being part of the solution. I think we've got a lot of work to continue to do that, and so there's a lot of research on how we bring solar and wind and other renewables that are intermittent in nature and integrate those in with fossil fuels, and how do we make that transition and continue to do that without compromising reliability and resiliencies of our systems. So that's going to be one thing. And the other thing is going to be storage. Because of that intermittency of these technologies, we're going to have to find ways of storing energy, whether it be directly through battery technologies or indirectly through making hydrogen or ammonia or other products that are generated from renewables during off-peak time periods when the wind's blowing at 2 o'clock in the morning, things like that. Those are all going to be big challenges as we move into the future. And then integrating not just the power system itself, but our manufacturing and chemical sector into a world where we are using less and less hydrocarbons and using other substitute products as well.
Here's a hard question for you.
All right.
You never get anyone to say, I don't want clean air or clean water or a healthy place to live. Everyone does.
Right.
But we're dependent on energy in very traditional forms, fossil fuel and electricity. What do you tell someone, just a regular citizen, about sustaining the things they like to do in their lives day to day, and actually this real challenge with energy and how they merge to potentially be unhealthy? How do you manage that?
Right. I mean, I think you see that, and people recognize that. it does come down to a lot of the decisions that you as an individual make. When you're going out and buying appliances, which appliance do you want to choose? The one that's a little bit more or the one that's less, but that one will say it's an investment that you're making, because not only does it help the environment, but by using less energy, you're going to wind up saving money as well, right? We have, as a society, such a current preference for money and time value for money, having things today as opposed to waiting. If I think about some of the bigger challenges, is getting over that kind of big hurdle, because from an individual decision-making perspective, that's what you're asking people to do, is to pay a little bit more now to get those benefits over time that come not just to the environment, but to your own wallet and your own pocket as well. And those are the big challenges to try to communicate to people.
A big part of what I've noticed at LSU is the great research here. And I came in as president. I wanted to really focus on scholarship first. You clearly have been authoring really important papers, and so it's exciting to talk about it. One of them you have on greenhouse gas inventory, which estimates our greenhouse gas emissions. Talk a little bit about the importance of this study, what you found, and how this information might be applied and used in society.
Yeah, so a great question. That was an important study. It was one that we did on behalf of the governor's office. It was an important input into the policymaking and opportunity evaluation process that the governor's climate task force used in terms of defining the policies and plans that they thought would be best to meet his goal of carbon neutrality by 2050. And so it was, before you get started on that, you have to know what the problem is to begin with. Where are those emissions coming from? What are their magnitude? How are they growing over time? And so what we did was, estimate and decompose those by sector and give stakeholders, particularly this task force, an understanding and appreciation of the scope of the problem and the challenges we have here, and where they need to think about targeted measures and strategies. One of the things that make us unique relative to other states is our industrial profile. Our industrial emissions are somewhere around 60 to 62% of all our greenhouse gas emissions. You compare that to the national average, which is somewhere around 20, 30%. That suggests a differing strategy for us as opposed to, let's say, New Hampshire, Vermont, or even California for that matter. And I think that was really the importance of that. And I think it underscores some of the things that we do at the center in terms of kind of making this bridge between academic work and how that gets applied in real life into policy.
The LSU Center for Energy Studies is an important piece here at the institution. Project a little bit your hopes for the center in the future. Where do you want it to be positioned for our area, for the state, and the world?
Well, I hope we continue to do some of the good work that we've done in the past. I hope we continue to maintain this strong service component that we have and the integration that we have with the community. That is one of the unique things, and I think probably one of the best things I love about my job is in continuing to do that. Working with students, I think students now who are interested in energy-based careers have a lot of uncertainty on what to do and what fields and how they should craft their education to meet those requirements in the future. So those are important. One of the things I'm finding with a lot of the projects that we do, and our initial carbon capture project was this way, and that is they require team efforts. They require a lot of interdisciplinary work. You're going to need people that are in the law school. You're going to need sociologists. You're going to need people in communications to help the public at large understand what carbon capture and some of these alternative chemical production activities require. You're going to need, obviously, people in physical sciences and engineering, et cetera. And a lot of the teams that we've put together to look at these issues are that way. And I hope that we're there to help facilitate that.
Well, we like to ask all our guests some fun questions. But in your case, I don't know, you've got such a tough deal. But first fun question. How would you pitch or sell to others interested in the field, come to LSU and be involved?
Oh, this place sells itself. I mean, it's really easy. The other thing about my job is I do get to bring we have lots of events, and I bring people in from all over the country. I've been doing this for decades, and I never have a hard time recruiting people to come down and visit. They always want to see our culture, our food. And when they come here and they see the campus, it's beautiful. They get to meet the people. And particularly if you're in the energy business and you're in Louisiana and you're in ground zero of all of that, it's pretty easy sell.
Well, you're in a serious business. So what do you do for fun?
Not a whole lot, but I do landscape a lot, work with my wife outside a lot, exercise. I try to do that a lot. I read. I do play golf badly. But that's about it.
I want to thank you for being with us here today, and thank you for the great work you're doing in this Energy Center. We need more of it. I hope you can recruit like crazy and bring a bunch of zealots who want to help us figure out how to deal with the really pressing problems of energy in the state, the country, and the world. Thank you, sir, for your service.
Thank you.